The origins of miniature painting. Painting in India is prehistoric, and the earliest extant example are the cave paintings at Bhimbekta, almost 30,000 years back. The murals at Ajanta are well known. Miniature painting, understood as small paintings, can be dated back to the 8th century palm leaf manuscripts of Pragna Paramita, where in a small space various images of the Buddha would be painted, and this would provide a certain magical protection to the sacred text. Similar paintings of the Jina were made in the sacred texts, like the Kalpa Sutra and the Kalakacharya Katha. This was around the 14th century. The 14th and 15th centuries were an axial period in the history of Indian art, particularly when it came to the artistic representations of the Shringaras of Krishna. While temple sculpture had reached its zenith in the previous centuries, the Hindu mind found new inspiration in literature, especially Kavya, and there was an efflorescence of Krishna painting, mainly in the Rajput courts of western and central India, Orissa and the hill states of the Himalayas. The Bhagavad Puran had chastened the Hindu mind, and it was ready to celebrate the love of Krishna through the visual and painted representations of Shringar Bhakti. And this was to inaugurate about 500 glorious years of miniature painting in these regions, and the ateliers were humming with activity. The Bhagavad had postulated that Krishna was to be celebrated not through ascetic rites and sacred rituals, but through song and dance. However, the rishis of the Bhagavad had little realized that painting would become an equally evocative vehicle of the ecstatic bhakti of Krishna and speak eloquently of the love of Krishna. This journey is an exploration of how that happened within the genre of miniature painting. However, when the rich poetic Krishna lore in the Bhagavad period became the life throb of North India, whether it was in temples or havelis, royal courts or village chowks, that artist undertook the challenge of portraying the many and delicate realities of the heart in the Shringar Bhakti of Krishna. For that reality needed not only the column or the brush, but kalpana or artistic imagination. It required a certain aesthetic sensitivity and not just the technique of the brush. It was necessary for the artist to understand the sensuality and the Shringar of the gopis, and even more the spirituality to respond to the flute of Krishna and develop a visual language of line and color robust enough to represent this beautiful love. These called for both aesthetic sensitivity and artistic finesse, for the realities of the heart knows no rationality and follows no rules and has a language of its own. It also needed enlightened patrons who were committed to Krishna Bhakti and employ lines not just to create forms, but to give these forms a lyrical movement, to create faces that not only reflected pomp and power, but that were alive with feelings of love and longing, and with eyes that spoke not the language of lust, but of tender love, and set them in a landscape that resonated with the rich echoes of love. A landscape in which the sap that flowed through the Nayak and the Nayika was no different from that which animated the birds and the blossoms, or the opulence of a haveli or a court where courtly love could shine. This is what created a living painting, and it is that journey of miniature artists which we will trace. The painter of Krishna miniatures was called upon not just to create a pretty picture, or merely to titillate his audience and draw them out of their jaded sensitivities with romantic portrayals, but to become a visual poet and present vision by transforming the well-sculpted words of Krishna poetry to create resonances of sound and music, form and feeling, motifs and metaphors, color and texture from his brush and palette. The objective, namely creating a painting that obeyed and conformed to the norms of painting that prevailed from the 15th to the 19th centuries, was important to the artist, but it was also the subjective feeling of madhurya that was paramount. And it was the beautiful expression of this that was to make his column unique, to bring to life the many beautiful romantic moments in Krishna's dalliance with the gopis, whether it was of amorous belonging or poignant longing, was the task entrusted to the artists of the various ateliers, and the excellence of the painting should therefore be judged primarily on this subjective criterion, while not ignoring significant surface and objective features of the painting. Krishna painting thus had to become visual poetry. The Chitravali had to have the capacity to take us from one episode of the love of Krishna to another, from one romantic moment to another, and to provide a point of entry for us, so that we are not mere voyeurs, but participants in the Madhurya of Krishna, and thus become Krishnamay, full of the essence and the ethos, the bliss and the beatitude of Krishna. The Bhagavad Puran had established Krishna as the prototypical romantic hero as early as the 10th century, and had ushered in Shringar Bhakti, or the ecstatic adoration of Krishna. This was followed by poetry in Sanskrit and then other bhashas. Pilgrims and priests, merchants and mendicants, traders and temple goers, the royalty and the nobility, people in chowks and havelis chanted and performed these kavyas. This ensured that the Shringar Bhakti of Krishna had a strong oral presence, mainly in the Muslim-dominated areas of the north and the west. This brought them not only religious solace, but equally an emotional and cultural enrichment in their otherwise parched and arid life. The love of Radha and Krishna filled their militant and peripatetic lives with an emotional meaning and vitality. The arid landscape of northwestern India, under the cloud of a militant Islam, did not allow outdoor religious celebrations or the building of temples, and the time was ripe for a visual and colorful presence of the romantic Krishna in a more intimate and sensual setting within the security and comfort of the court and the haveli. And this was to happen through animated groups and courtly soirees, and was a stimulus to the painting in the 16th century. And it was this that was to transform Krishna of the idyllic Vrindavan of the Bhagavad to the painted Krishna of the Rajput courts. This was Hindu artistic and religious sensibility at its evocative best, where poetry, painting and piety came together. Paper was available in India by the 13th or early 14th century, and it came probably through China along the Silk Route, or through Asia along trade routes across the oceans. While the mural tradition was ancient and well established, the technique of miniature painting on palm leaf in the Jain and Buddhist manuscripts was already well established, at least since the 11th century, and probably even earlier. Jain manuscripts like the Kalpa Sutra and the Kalakacharya Katha, initially done on palm leaves and later on paper, made to look like these palm leaves, saw the emergence of the sensuous woman drawn with a firm but wiry line, tentative but not timid, gazing frontally outward with her three-quarter profile and the large farther eye projecting out, self-assured and freestanding in a monochrome background, her sensuality suppressed but not denied, her emotions controlled but not annulled, and the excitement taut and hidden in the sacred and austere ambience of the Jain manuscript. The woman of these Jain manuscripts, as seen in the 1493 Kalpa Sutra of the Devasana Pado, was drawn with a taut and wiry outline, with a three-quarter face and the farther eye projecting into space. However, it was this very same artistic creation of the woman in the tiny space of the Jain manuscript that was to emerge to the artists of the later Rajput courts as a full-fledged sensuous and romantic Naika that was to be the cynos of our attention in the depiction of the Shringar Rasa of Krishna. And equally the conditions were right for her to evolve into a sensuous, dallying, heart-throbbing Naika, the beloved of Krishna. While Shringar Bhakti found its utterance in poetry, its best visual expressions were to be the miniature paintings from the 15th century onwards. Two extant artistic representations that exemplify the early Western Indian, also called the Gujarat style, need special attention early in our journey, which are the 15th century Vasanta Vilasa scroll on cloth and the illuminated Bala Gopala Stuti on paper, for they establish in no uncertain terms the veracity and the vibrancy of the indigenous Indian kalam in expressing Shringar Ras. Such was the robustness and sensuality of the Hindu style, whether executed by Hindu or Muslim artists, that even with changing patrons and different artists, that quintessential indigenous stamp of emotional fervor was never lost, for it incorporated the earthiness of romance, the passion of love, the poignancy of longing, and the meaning of viraha, all set within a two-dimensional space of a painting that could soar to heights of excitement and passion. The Vasanta Vilasa scroll of 1451, which is an ode to Kama, the god of love, resonates with animated and sensuous thought through wiry figures with the three-quarter face and the further eye set in a luxuriant landscape of lush trees, singing birds, caged parrots and aquatic animals, buzzing bees and dancing peacocks, richly patterned Gujarat textiles, romantic swings in silver moonlight, women applying sandal paste and embracing couples in love pavilions, set against a monochrome evocative background that creates the ambience of love in spring and signals the artistic talents of the native Gujarat painter of the 15th century. This conveyed the stanzas of love poem into a two-dimensional space, which is alive with feeling, and this is the harbinger of paintings that are to follow. Underneath the not so refined lines and colors lies a whole universe of tender feelings and pulsating passions that are epitomized by the joy of spring and the throb of romance. The painted manuscripts of the Bala Gopala Sthiti and the Krishna Karanamritam, based on the compositions of Bilva Mangal Lila Shuka, who lived in the early 14th century and who was considered a poet saint even in his own time, are perhaps the earliest illuminated texts that give a visual presence to Krishna. Both the texts bring to life a sacred poem about Krishna which had gained considerable popularity throughout India, though the crude but animated figures set in a monochrome background. There is both the Vasanta Vilasa on cloth and the Bala Gopala Stuti and the Krishna Karanamritam on paper. There is the signature and the stamp of the native Indian kalam, where matters of the heart are expressed without inhibition, where love in all its unabashed sensuality is affirmed and celebrated, where the rasa of Shringar flows through human beings and equally in everything in the world around them, where there is the holistic feeling of joy and abandon, where to be human is to love, and where painting is visual poetry, and poetry is the language of the deepest longings of the heart and the mind. The human figures in this early illuminated text are marked by the characteristic protruding eye and the angularities and embellished by richly adorned textiles. The turning of the head in full profile while the body remaining frontal is a development of great artistic significance of the 16th century, and this were to capitalize in order to create a more animated palette where love would speak in many colors and romance would throb through manifold lines. It has rightly been said that the early Western Indian style was important in conserving the native Indian ethos despite a growing domination in the north and west of the country. The earliest representation of Krishna Shringar in the miniature style was in Gujarat, where the Bhagavad Puran was transformed into Chitravali. The 16th century in Gujarat saw the Indian artist perfecting the human form within the limitations of a two-dimensional pictorial space, so that it was capable of expressing the full range of human emotions, and this was particularly important in representing the Shringar Rasa of Krishna. The face had turned to full profile, while the chest remained frontal and the background was a backdrop like a curtain on the stage, giving primacy to the human figures. and the many nuances of the body, its gestures and movements, the eyes and the gaze. It was as if we were in the audience and we were watching a romantic play on stage, where the characters look at each other and not at us. And for the first time in India, painting had become divorced from the sculptural tradition and moved into an independent world of its own. This is the fascinating journey of the origins of miniature painting in India.